Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we're continuing our series of What Not to Do episodes with ex-BigLaw recruiter Sadie Jones. And today, we're going to be talking about callback interviews. Your Law School Toolbox host today is Alison Monahan, and typically I'm with Lee Burgess. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so that you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. Together, we're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. I also run the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review or rating on your favorite listening app. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can always reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we would love to hear from you. With that, let's get started. Welcome back. Today, we're continuing our series of What Not to Do episodes with ex-BigLaw recruiter Sadie Jones, and we're talking about callback interviews. So welcome, Sadie.
Thanks for having me back.
Oh, definitely our pleasure. So first off, for listeners who maybe aren't so familiar with this, what is a callback interview?
So it's sort of the second round in the on-campus interviewing process, and it's where you're invited back to the office of the law firm after you've done the initial interview on campus.
Okay, and this is part of the summer associate process for larger law firms, is that right?
Correct. And even probably some, mid-size, but yeah, usually it would be, a larger established firm.
Okay, so you're interviewing for the next summer and you have done the on-campus interview. They liked you, obviously. And so now they've invited you back. Typically, I'm trying to remember how many interviews you typically would do, like 6 or so?
Yeah, I would say anywhere between 4 and 6. And some of it would depend whether you come in the morning, you come in the afternoon, things change last minute. But, I would prepare for, a whole round of interviews with different people.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I recall when I was doing these, it was usually a mix of partners, associates. You'd probably talk to the recruiting person. It was going to be like a mix of stuff.
Yeah, as a recruiter, a perfect schedule, I would say, would be a mix of genders and practice groups and levels. And, you want to give them an idea of different people at the firm. So hopefully that's, what you're going to get when you come back to see like a snapshot of who works there.
Right. And you're going to be visiting the actual office too. So you can kind of see what that might feel like.
Yeah. So they're going to move you around to their different offices. And so, you get a feel of just like what everyday life is there.
Yeah, it's kind of fun, actually. I mean, it's sort of like anthropological. You'd go in and be like, oh, I don't know, like these people all have their doors closed. I think you can learn a lot, actually, in these callbacks.
Or just people's messy offices. They have papers everywhere. What's the vibe? Are people loud? All that sort of stuff.
Right, or if it's like fancy artwork, and are you comfortable with that, or would you prefer like a more informal setting? So you can really pick up a lot about the kind of feel of the firm by doing these callbacks.
Absolutely.
So I think it's something not to be afraid of. I mean, I think it can be intimidating, but it's also an opportunity really for people to figure out like, okay, is this a place I would be comfortable working?
And I would remind everybody that after you've made it through the initial screen interview on campus, they've decided that you're qualified. Right. In theory. So I think you should feel like you're going in, with a step up from where you started, and that they're not looking at you, really for your grades or just the basic stuff. They're trying to get to know you and see if you'll be a fit. So I think you should go in with, confidence.
Do you have any sense of what percentage of these callback interviews end up in an offer situation? Does that vary a lot by firm, or is there kind of typical?
It varies a lot by firm. And some firms want to do more callbacks. So I would say, it could be like 10 to 40%.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So there's a big range.
But it's not a guarantee.
No, it's not. So I would say the thing to remember is, you've hit the threshold for they think you're qualified to work there. But I really think the callback interview is a lot more based on, personality and like some of those more intangible things and, how you act.
Right. Well, we'll get into that in a minute. But before we do, I mean, what are firms looking for in these callbacks? Is it something that's different from the initial interview?
Well, I think they are kind of looking for a consensus, right? Because there's multiple people meeting you. So I think, it is interesting to see how different people react to the same person.
Right.
So I think just that's helpful. I think they're looking for someone who can carry a conversation for 30 minutes. Can potentially handle, an interview with someone who's more difficult or doesn't talk as much. I think you do think it's interesting how people handle some of the, maybe a more difficult partner in an interview. I think they want to see that you're polished, that you're put together, that you show up on time, that you show up wearing the right clothes, that kind of thing. Just the real surface level stuff. And everywhere I've worked has always had a different name for it, but just kind of that it quality, that's hard to explain, but they feel like makes you special and makes you a fit for that firm, because I think every firm thinks they're special.
Right, they do all think that, although, to be honest, I think the reality is most of them are pretty similar.
I agree. So I think this is a lot about knowing how to play the game and making them feel like you really like them.
Right. And that's a
you're
great
interested.
Point. Yeah, definitely don't tell them that they seem like every other firm that you're interviewing with.
Yeah, try to find something that makes them unique, whether or not it's really something that makes them very unique.
Yeah, I mean, and hopefully at this point, if you're bothering to do a callback, like you have some actual interest in working for this firm.
I agree, because I think that, that's probably the top thing not to do is not seem like you don't care. Like, even if you go in and it's not your top choice or for whatever reason, they should feel like you are.
Yeah, I think there's no reason not to basically sell them on you. Like you can, it's better to get the offer and turn it down than to screw things up and be arrogant or be be whatever and have them be like, I don't think this person is a great fit, because if that happens too many places, you're not going to have an offer anywhere.
Absolutely. And the truth is that, when it comes down to it, if you do have multiple offers, you're probably going to let the firms know. I've never had anyone be dishonest about something like that. So that is going to work in your favor. And the more the better, the more choices you have, the better. And you're in the position of power really after the callback interview if you get an offer.
Yeah, and I think you can't just rely on, this firm is not my top choice. I'm only going to focus on my top choice, because what if you're super nervous and you screw up one interview and your top choice because you're so nervous, and then you need something to fall back on. So, I mean, my approach to this is always like, if I'm going to do this, I may as well try my best to get the offer.
Absolutely. And I also think no matter what your class rank is, or where you think you fall, you also should not assume you're getting an offer from everyone and anyone. And you should go in, wanting it and making sure that they know that. Because I can tell you that I've been at places that did not give an offer to the number one student at a school.
Oh, I think some places actually take pleasure in turning down people, to be honest.
But this was a place that was particularly snobby and kind of, I felt like really took pride in having the top students. And it was just like, we cannot do this.
Right.
This person just bombed it.
Right.
So be careful.
All right, well, let's move into the entertaining section of our broadcast today. What are some common problem areas that you've seen in the callback process? And we'll just talk about these briefly to start, and then we'll kind of go through them one by one.
Okay. So I would say how you dress is definitely, a top issue. Not dressing in business attire. Looking too flashy, even, weird things like carrying around an awkward bag the whole time, things like that. I think you'd be surprised at how much people remember that and kind of notice it. Like, it seemed like this was distracting.
Right. I've seen people carry like enormous briefcases and things. It's just sort of like, you're not going to court.
Yeah.
Like, what are you doing?
Or for a woman, like wearing shoes that you're not comfortable walking in. Because you're probably going to be walking around the office. So I'd be careful with that.
Yeah. I mean, if you're in a city, you're probably going to be walking to lunch as well.
Yes.
So that may be several blocks. So, yeah, I mean, you don't want to be that person who has to change into their flip-flops just to get to the restaurant.
Yes. I also think, if we're talking about law firm, it needs to be business attire for the callback interview. I really feel like there's just not any room on this one.
I agree. I mean, I worked at a firm which prided themselves on not being very formal. And, people there sometimes showed up to do callback interviews and they weren't particularly formal. But I would think always erring on the side of caution. I mean, I certainly remember when I interviewed there, I definitely wore a business suit. I mean, that's
absolutely.
Just what
I don't think anyone's going to ding you for that.
No, exactly. I was just more like, you know what? It's just easier if I put on the same suit that I've put on other places, and I know it's appropriate, and I have the matching shoes, and I have the matching jewelry, and I have a bag that works with this outfit. I don't think this is a place to get creative.
Yeah, and no one's going to say, "Oh, she was so overdressed."
Right, exactly. They're not going to think you're overdressed for doing an interview. They might be like, "Oh, wow, you didn't have to wear that," but they're never going to be like, "Oh, you shouldn't have worn a suit." You can always get away with a suit. The reverse is not true.
I think just generally law firms are places where they sort of expect it to be like respectful. And I think that's how you should go in thinking about it. That's the kind of place it is, and you're looking to have them hire you.
Yeah.
Something else I would say is not being prepared for what's on your resume. Or not being prepared for certain questions. So obviously this has probably already come up in the, initial interview, but now you're dealing with a whole day with multiple people.
Right.
And so they all have a different take on your resume. And there are some people who really focus on the work. They want to talk to you about substantive stuff or something they're working on and that kind of thing. There are other people who might talk to you about nothing about law school.
That was
just
pretty much me. I was the chit chatter, like, oh, I see you've been to India. Tell me about that. Oh, you're interested in yoga. Oh, tell me about cheese, Which, I mean, honestly, I thought at the time would be softball questions. Like you put these things on the interest section of your resume, presumably because you want to talk about them. But that was not always the case.
Yeah, I think sometimes law students get really caught up in thinking that it all should be substantive. And so they just get tripped up by random questions or, they might ask you about the thing you don't want them to ask you about in your resume.
Well, almost certainly somebody's going to ask you about the thing you don't want them to ask you about. I mean,
if there's something that stands out, right?
Anything weird, someone's going to ask you about it.
So I would say just be really prepared that people can ask you all sorts of questions. And you really should have an answer for everything on your resume, for every time of your, academic and career life. And, be prepared for the questions of where do you see yourself in 5 years? Or, that sound kind of to me like silly questions. And I think they're less about what the actual answer is than that you have an answer.
Right.
And it sounds like you know what you're talking about. So all of that stuff I think is just important. You don't know who these people are going to be, and you don't know how it's going to switch from one to the other.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Like you're dealing with a lot of different personalities. You're dealing with a lot of different levels. One thing that got me one time, I think, in a clerkship interview was someone started asking me really detailed questions about my undergraduate honors thesis. Wow. Which I'm like, wow, I have not thought about this one for a while. But, in the moment, I basically just realized they know absolutely nothing about this. They're not going to go look it up. I can tell them basically whatever I want that seems reasonable. And they're really just doing this to see if I get flustered.
Yeah. I was going to say, if you started stammering about it, it would be like, how do you not know anything about your
Right.
own?
I mean, there has to be a question about, which statistical analysis program did you use? And that's one of the things you're like, to be perfectly honest, I know we used one of the big, 2 or 3. I don't know if it was SAP or whatever the other one is. I can't remember right now. It's been a while, And
then just move on. Yeah.
Do you want to ask some more questions about this? Because I'll talk to you about it. But, and they really, I think this was actually a clerkship interview and it was one of the clerks who was just generally being kind of obnoxious. But, I mean, it's fair enough. If it's on there, you need to be able to talk about it.
Yeah. So I think, just being prepared with your own background is really important.
And particularly, I would say, I think a more fair question that's probably much more likely to come up is if you list some sort of writing sample or you list a note, for example, just the title of your journal note. People are definitely going to dig into that because they want to see how you talk about the law.
Well, and I think that's also a case where your resume is actually your chance to put out what you want to talk about.
Right, exactly.
And highlight things.
About it, don't put it on there.
Yeah. So I would say, I never believe in lying or saying anything dishonest on a resume, but a resume is a story you're telling, and you can, push it in one direction or another.
Yeah, although one thing never to push, do not put languages that you're not actually comfortable talking in, because I have seen people walk into interviews in that language, and, if you're not totally confident, don't put it on there.
I also feel strongly, even if you put it on there and you say like something, intro or conversational, just don't do it. I don't think it's a good idea.
No, I think unless you're fluent.
Yeah,
or basically
exactly.
Fluent.
I think it just looks like pretentious, or like you're trying to fudge something.
Right. I mean, if you grew up speaking a different language in your house and that was your primary language, or if you, studied abroad and you really have learned a language and you feel like you're basically fluent, that's one thing. If you're like, oh, I, did 3 months in Barcelona.
Yeah.
It's like, don't put Spanish on your
Exactly. No one wants to know something where you know a couple sentences. That doesn't help.
Yeah, like you need to be able to speak Hindi, basically, if you put it on there.
Exactly. So yeah, even if you're familiar. And I actually, I think that about hobbies. You don't have to put something on that, you're super great at, but you should be able to talk about it for real. So whether or not it's, kind of playing it up, you need to be able to.
Yeah, don't be the person that I had to interview who put baking on his resume and asked him, oh, what do you like to bake? And he kind of looked at me blankly. And I'm like, it's on your resume. And he's like, oh, well, I guess it's more accurate to say I like to watch cooking shows.
Well, and it's just like, well, why didn't you write that on your resume?
Yeah, I was just like, okay, you're not giving me a lot to work with here, guys. Sorry.
Yeah.
Like, this is a softball. Come on, make something up.
Absolutely.
And I think honestly, I think a lot of these issues really come down to confidence. And I don't want to say, bullshitting, but basically, like, you're doing an interview to be a firm lawyer. This is a lot of what people do, actually, is maintaining confidence when maybe they don't actually know what they're talking about. This is what you do with clients. It might be what you do with a judge. They're kind of testing you to see, can you do this?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's like judgment issues.
Yeah. All right. So what are some other things that you see frequently, just briefly?
So problems with the lunch interview.
Oh, yes. Always meals. Those are always fun. All right. Yes. We're going to table that for a minute.
Okay. Another thing is, maybe being too informal or coming in a little bit too confident, like you already have the offer or you expect the offer. Yeah. That's just a turnoff. Like, no one likes that.
I think, too, that can come down to, like, people make the mistake that particularly at lunch, like, the associates are more, like, friendly and they let their guard down. But let's table that one. All right, what else?
Showing up late.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of actual issues around travel,
yes.
Whether it's travel in the city or travel setup. I mean, you've got to think of this whole process really as part of the interview process. So, I mean, I'm sure as a recruiter, you are the one interacting with people because oftentimes, if you're in school in New York and you're interviewing in New York, it's pretty easy. You just get on the subway. But if you are in school in New York and you're interviewing in San Francisco, you're going to have to fly there. You're going to have to get a hotel. Somebody's going to cover this and that. And all of that can really be a minefield.
Absolutely. So my suggestion is you should go to the NALP website, which is the organization that basically polices all of this and has all the rules, because it's all really organized. And there are certain rules that all the firms agree to. And so there's a form that has all of that and has like the exact way it's supposed to work. So it has how many days you're allowed to be there that they cover and what they cover and things like that. And the last thing you want to do is do things that are outside of that, or try to fudge things, or try to have them pay for things that they shouldn't, or, try to have them pay for meals with your friends when you were in the city and not give like itemized receipts and things like that. That's the kind of stuff that the recruiters actually look at and will come back to bite you.
Yeah, I've heard all kinds of crazy stuff about people wanting to go to some friend's wedding or something and then scheduling one interview in a city outside of town that they'd already been to. People submitting crazy receipts for things like the mini bar or porn. I mean, these are just things you do not do.
Or, it turned, like, you see 2 separate receipts for the same night where it should have been dinner, but one thing was, like, drinks with all your friends and another thing was dinner. You're going to notice, like, why were there 2 receipts for the same night?
Oh, yeah. I remember one time I was doing an interview in San Francisco, and I'd lived in San Francisco. So a friend of mine came over, and we were going to go out to a show or something. And without really thinking about it, he, like, poured a couple of drinks out of the minibar. And then the next day when I was getting my tallied up receipts, I was like, oh, wait, okay, I need this on a totally separate bill that, just I'll pay for separately. And then this is the one that I need to submit because, you can't, like, you don't want to mark through things with a marker and things like that. Like, you want all of this stuff to be clean, like as clean as possible, as professional as possible. And for a lot of people, I mean, you may not be used to staying in like relatively nice hotels and flying around by yourself. And you don't get to fly business class. Don't ask.
Oh my gosh, I know. And I think you just have to keep in mind, is it worth giving up a job offer over a free meal or something?
Yeah, it's just, this is not a place to get cute. Don't go to like don't go to like Michael Minna for dinner. Just order room service from the hotel or whatever and order one thing,
Yeah, and I would look at there's like a clear limit.
Yeah.
So just see what it is, like, and stick with it. So I think all this stuff, can be the kind of thing that can really trip you up. But as long as you kind of read it ahead of time and know what the rules are, it's the same for everyone. So it's actually pretty simple.
Yeah. And the firms will tell you like how they're splitting stuff and things like that. So like people spend, I think, a lot of time in interview, like stressing out about the logistics of the travel and things. But as you're saying, like, this is not something you need to worry about. It's just something you need to know what the rules are. Yeah. Be sure that you are strictly compliant with them, that nothing you're sending in sends out any red flags.
Because I will tell you that there is no way that the recruiter is not going to tell somebody, like the hiring partner, what happened if there's like an actual like big issue. And no firm wants to take a risk on someone like that. If they're acting like that in the first callback interview.
When they're interviewing.
Why would you possibly want to make an offer to this person? That's
if you're submitting like mini bar receipts when you're interviewing, that is a huge red flag that maybe there's an issue here that they do not want to take on.
Yes, I agree.
All right, so basically like the travel stuff, just do it, make sure you know what you're getting into. Let's talk about the meals and the associate situation, because I think that's a place where people get tripped up a lot.
Absolutely. Are you talking about the lunch interview?
Yes.
So I will say as a recruiter, I would always try to schedule people in the morning so that there was a lunch interview.
Yeah, and I think as a candidate, you probably want to do that if possible.
I agree. So I think it actually can benefit everybody, but I think it can also hurt you. So I would say really the thing to just remember is, yes, you're going out for lunch. You're leaving the office. You're probably going somewhere nice. And you're probably going with people that are around your age, or are fairly junior. Not always, but those are the people who usually want to do it, have more time, and kind of want to be more casual with people.
Well, and I feel like the firms kind of want that too, because they want this different perspective. So they want to send you out with like, a second year and see how it goes.
So I would say a couple things can happen. One, I think the candidate can be too casual with the person and forget they're on an interview. Mm-hmm. And I think that is like a big danger. Because the person doing it is probably taking it somewhat seriously. They can get free lunches a lot at these kind of things. So I think people who really do them and take the time out, like, usually do care. So they're going to write something up about how the lunch went. And so you don't want to be like telling them things that you wouldn't have told someone in an in-office interview. All sorts of things. Like, people say they don't even want to work there. Like, it's not, if this isn't their top choice. I think they, just have a tendency to kind of say things, out of turn. I did have a candidate try to order drinks, or did order drinks, where just the candidate did. So it wasn't even like the associates were ordering them and they felt like they had to go along with it. It's just like they went around the lunch table. Other people ordered iced teas, and this person ordered margarita.
Yeah, don't do that.
Yeah, that's probably like, I will never forget that.
Well, and I think that's just one of those things, like, bright line rule here, don't order alcoholic drinks at a callback interview lunch. Even if everyone else at the table is having a beer and they offer, just say no. Hey, I'm totally cool with lemonade, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't imagine anyone giving you a hard time. Now, I would be upset at an associate who did that, who ordered alcoholic drinks at interview lunch.
Right. I think that's a pretty bright line rule for them too, but sometimes people don't pay attention. So,
but they're not looking for the the job offer in that case.
Right. I think I've seen people, maybe not at callbacks, but I think I've seen people there order like a glass of wine, like an associate. It's like, okay, fine, you're a senior associate, you're a fifth year or whatever, have a glass of wine. But never the candidate should.
Absolutely. So, that's an example. I think another way that it can be a little bit of a minefield is that sometimes the more junior people can actually be tougher on the people coming up. I've noticed it can sort of go either way. Either, they're easier because they don't have as much experience interviewing people. But I think there's other people. I know a partner once described it as like pulling up the ladder behind them. And so I think you should be prepared for, they might ask you tough questions at lunch. Or they might try to trip you up.
I remember a lunch where like the two people that were interviewing me started talking amongst themselves about like how many hours they were billing, and then kind of turned to me to be like, well, would you be comfortable doing this? Mm-hmm. And I think you just have to be like, well, that's the job, This is not another thing. Like, this is not the time to get into an actual discussion about work-life balance. Like, save that for later.
Absolutely. And that goes for any callback interview. Like, you are still looking for the job. You have plenty of time to ask those questions, and there'll be opportunity to go back and follow up with people. But at this point, you're looking for the job offer.
Yeah, at this point, you're eager beaver. Oh, billing 3,000 hours a year. Sounds great. Can't wait. Sign me up.
Absolutely. And I think you can ask questions to find out that information without it being about like that you don't want to work that much. Right. You can just ask them, what they're working on, or
I think what you're working on is always a safe area. I don't think how much you're working is a particularly safe area. I wouldn't go there in a callback.
But it could come out.
It could come out.
Sure. You could find out that information.
Yeah, if they say they're at trial, then okay, you can assume they're working a lot. They're probably not taking you to lunch if they're at trial. So
absolutely.
What about people who are not comfortable necessarily at this point in a more fancy eating environment?
Good question. I would say keep it really simple. In terms of what you're ordering. And I wouldn't I think you can walk into that and just act nervous because you're not, that comfortable in it. Mm-hmm. I would say just don't overthink it. Sit down and do what you would do in any restaurant.
Well, I think, sometimes people, a lot of people in law school obviously have grown up going to fancy restaurants or any restaurants, but there are people who haven't. And I think in that case, you probably want to do some preparation with YouTube videos or whatever online beforehand. Maybe take yourself out to dinner after watching a few videos, go with a friend who did grow up in a different environment so they can kind of help you. Like,
see what the cutlery is.
Yeah, what the cutlery is. Like, this is your bread plate. This is where your water glass is. This is where your other glasses are. This is your salad fork. This is your main fork. Basically just go from the outside in. But, if you're not comfortable with that, I think you need to practice.
No, I think that's an excellent point. I also think you can take your cues from the other people at the table.
Exactly.
So, kind of see what they're ordering, see like which courses they're ordering, that sort of thing. Or order even something that seems simple,
even like which water glass are they picking up? Because I'll be honest, sometimes like the associates at those lunches will actually use the wrong bread plate or the wrong water plate. And at that point, you just switch.
Yeah, good point.
If they don't know what they're doing, you're like, oh, I think this one's mine, right? Okay, great. I'm just going to take that water glass. Just roll with it.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is to take your cue, from the person that already works there.
Right, and ordering too. Like, are you ordering appetizers? Are you ordering dessert? Are you just getting one thing? If you don't want to be that person who orders a salad plus a soup plus an entree plus a dessert when they're like, we have an hour and we're just getting sandwiches.
Yeah, and I feel really strongly about this. So I would never order like a different amount of courses in them.
Yeah.
And so I think that means even if you wouldn't have ordered 3 courses, but they are, you do anyway.
Yeah, and oftentimes people talk about this. They'll say, what are you thinking of getting? Oh, are you guys getting a salad to start? Or, okay, I'll get that too. Like, just go with the crowd here.
I also think please don't order anything messy, or you have to like eat with your hands. Or
I would say even something like, sometimes even things like a hamburger can kind of trip you up because you're not really thinking like, oh, you're going to have stuff falling all over the place and it's going to be all over your fingers. Probably knife and fork is best, like small bites.
Like a salad always works pretty well.
And the thing is, you can always go buy food later if you're hungry.
Yeah, I think you have to remember this isn't really about the free lunch.
Right, exactly. It's like just do something simple, and then if you're hungry later, have a Cliff Bar.
Yeah, exactly.
Or take yourself out to lunch and eat whatever you want. It can be as messy as you want. Fine.
But I do think, it's a situation where it can trip you up. But I think that if you don't overthink it too much and you remember that you're on an interview, you will be fine.
Yeah, exactly. It's basically just like go in, nice, polite, nod, smile, try not to spill anything on yourself. I mean, what if you do have a disaster, like you spill water or your tea all over the table or something?
I would make a joke about it, probably. Yeah. I would have a sense of humor, crying or running out or...
Yeah, I mean, you just basically,
isn't gonna help.
That's one of those where you just got to be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe what just happened. How embarrassing. Oh, where's the waiter? We need a towel.
Yeah, this can go on your like all-time interview stories or something.
Yeah, another thing, this involves, the wait staff in the restaurant, but also everyone else, is you have to not be rude.
Absolutely. I have heard a lot of stories where an associate will remember that a candidate, was rude or snappy, or had some kind of issue.
Or like send food back.
Yes.
It's just like, don't do that. Just pick at it.
Yeah, I think, and that's where, again, remember this is not about the free lunch.
Right.
This is about you want a job.
Yeah, it's like, oh, your steak's slightly overcooked. Okay, deal with it.
Exactly.
What about dietary restrictions?
So as a recruiter, I would always ask when I was scheduling the callback if you have dietary restrictions. This is an area where also I would really only say it if it's something that really would affect like a restaurant that they were choosing. Mm-hmm. So I think being a vegetarian or a vegan, that counts. I don't think if you're allergic to some random thing, you need to tell them on the phone.
Yeah.
It just kind of makes it seem like, I don't know, you're anal about that kind of stuff. I feel like you probably get through life going to restaurants and figuring it out.
Yeah, I mean, probably no one needs to know that you're like paleo. It's just like, okay, you can probably find something that you can eat.
Exactly. So I think the way that, or you're kosher is something to tell them. Something that where it really would affect like the restaurant that they're choosing. Other than that, I think it's fine. And just, you got to make it work at the restaurant that they choose.
Yeah. I think that's all right. I mean, I think defining what you need up front and then you just roll with it. If I tell them I'm a pescatarian and they take me to a steakhouse, I'm probably not going to bring that up again. I'm also not going to order a steak. I might be like, oh, I'll just have a salad and a side. Totally fine. Don't need to make a big deal.
It's rare that you go to a restaurant where there's like no options for someone, even who's, has specific dietary restrictions.
Yeah, I think there'll be something. So just eat something else if you're hungry later.
Exactly.
All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about the interviews themselves, because I think sometimes people get tripped up here because they feel like they need to have like radically different interviews or radically different questions that they're asking. I mean, I think you do obviously need to have some questions prepared. But like we were talking about earlier, something as simple as, what kind of work are you doing? What are you working on right now? That can be a great question for everyone.
I would say, you should always have sort of a running list that you can refer back to, without too much trouble. It's pretty rare that someone's going to talk to someone else about the question that they asked. It might come up when they're writing a review. But I would say also, you really should have, a bunch of questions think you could use, but you should be in the moment. So use it where appropriate and with the right person.
Yeah, I think you
don't want to try to like steer it to like, oh no, I needed to ask this question. So try to get the conversation back there. That is awkward.
No, I think you need to be prepared to carry the conversation for the entire interview if you have to. because occasionally you will encounter someone who's just not a great interviewer. Maybe they're distracted, they're tired, whatever. Like you may end up having to basically talk or ask questions for the entire 20 to 30 minutes, and you need to be ready for that. You can't just go in with like 2 questions.
Yeah.
I mean, you shouldn't be asking about things that are really obvious from the website. You need to be prepared. I mean, it's a callback. You should be pretty serious about this. Sometimes you'll get the interview list and you can kind of ask people beforehand. I think there's a little bit of a line because you don't want to seem like a stalker. Mm-hmm. I don't think you should be asking people personal questions like, oh, I saw online that you have 3 kids and one of them just won the Little League championship. Like, you're like, okay, that's creepy.
I totally agree. And I can think of a candidate that did something similar and knew some really obscure things about this person.
I mean, sometimes people think that's
really
impressive. Awkward. Yeah, it's like, oh, I've done all this work. It's like, you need to keep that to yourself.
Yeah, all I would really know is, what practice group are they in? Do they have any, like, recent big cases? I think is fine,
right.
If it was something, well known. And it's always good to, know what law school they went to. Like, if there's something that you have in common, because a lot of times you will, that's how they match it up.
Right. Oftentimes
because they're trying to come up with something so that you can have good conversation.
Right. The recruiter probably hooked you up with this person for a reason. And things shift all the time at the last minute. Just because you're not talking to the right person doesn't mean that, the firm hates you. It just means somebody got called in to do something immediate that they had to do. And sometimes, the person that you've been passed off to might have seen your resume 5 minutes before. They might not have ever seen your resume, so you need to bring copies. I would sometimes get calls like, hey, we've just had a cancellation. Can you do this interview in 5 minutes? It's like, okay, fine. Who am I talking to? What do I need? What information do I have here to work with? So you need to be prepared to help people in those scenarios. It doesn't mean that the firm doesn't like you or doesn't take you seriously. It's just the way that things roll in a law firm. Like, things come up.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a good quality to show them that you're okay with that and that you could roll with it, because that's going to happen all the time.
And again, you can kind of make like a joke out of it if it's, obviously it's like kind of a weird, awkward situation. Like, oh, you're not who I'm supposed to be talking to. Well, not a problem. Let's get the awkwardness out of the way, and then we'll sit down and have our conversation.
Well, and the truth is that's an opportunity to ask them. Like, you can ask them honest questions, that you don't know, about what they do or whatnot. So, I think anyone can really come up with enough for 20 or 30 minutes. Like, it could drag on, but you should have enough in mind. Another thing is, if there's like 5 minutes at the end, if the person always leaves for questions, do not say, no, I don't have any.
Right. You need to be
I'm surprised at how many people do that. It doesn't make you look good.
Well, it's also just like, what are we supposed to do now? Like, now it's my problem to keep asking you questions? Thanks. Like, you're not a helpful person.
Well,
I'm a helpful person.
Yeah, it's like you're interested in my firm, but you have 0 questions. You know everything about it now. So it's really about you just being prepared and having something to say.
Yeah, and I think because people are looking at you as a candidate and saying, would this person be helpful to me if I was staffed on a case with them? And part of that is like holding up your end of the conversation. If you can't do that, it's just like, what do you think this is about?
Yeah, and I think that actually is what these interviews come down to. It's not really as much about the substantive answers and the things that I think make people nervous than it is about, do I want to work with this person? If I were here at the office late, do they seem like someone I could count on?
Right.
Because they're going to be below me. So, I'm going to be giving them assignments. So,
I mean, you might literally be hiring someone that you end up supervising.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that that's what the candidate should keep in mind going into it, that's what the person's really thinking about. Yeah,
exactly. And I think a lot of this really is just, don't get flustered. Just kind of go with whatever happens. Try to have a sense of humor. Try to be a person that somebody might want to be around at 3 a.m, which you might well end up being, in a very stressful situation. You're at trial, you're doing a deal, whatever. Everybody's tired. Are you that person that's going to drive everyone nuts by being like, well, I don't have anything to do? It's like, well, figure something out. Like, we're at trial. There's plenty for you to do.
Absolutely. And I think what it comes down to a lot of times is like, do I like this person?
Yeah.
That's kind of what they're writing the review of.
Yeah, and sometimes that can get weird if like the person interviewing you is being weird or sexist or racist or whatever you want to pick. I mean, stuff happens. It does.
And that can be up to you. You know what I mean? You can take that as a reflection on whether or not you want this job later. Though.
Yeah, and I think
person is.
I mean, the reality is nobody who's doing these interviews really has a whole lot of training. So people sometimes do obviously ask questions that are inappropriate and or illegal. And, I think that's something you consider in advance. Like, how are you going to respond if somebody starts asking you about things that they're not allowed to ask you about legally? And, I think it depends a lot on their intent in the scenario.
I was going to say, a lot of times they really don't even mean it the way it sounds. I know, just as an example, something that would always come up is that you're not actually supposed to ask where someone's from, because there can be a lot of, implications in that. I do think that most of the time the people really don't know, and they really are, maybe they see that it looks like you had a connection to the Midwest, and they do, and that's really all they're saying. So I think just kind of keep that in mind. Like, what do they really mean by this? And like, yeah, exactly. How am I going to respond in a way that's, I'm comfortable with and, isn't going to make this awkward if it doesn't need to be.
Right. I mean, obviously, depending on who you are and what your background is, this may or may not come up more often. It's just the reality of life. So I think if this is something that you think is likely to come up, you need to be more prepared to handle it.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, we are unfortunately out of time. Any final thoughts on this?
My final thoughts are really, as I think we've said, during this conversation, you are going in trying to get a job offer. So I would keep all of the questions that, you have more about like life at the law firm till later.
Right.
I just think that's an area where people just over and over again get into trouble. So, I understand how important pro bono is and, all of that kind of stuff. But I personally don't think that it's great to emphasize it too much in this kind of interview. These places are for-profit organizations and they want to know that you want to work hard. And, I don't think that they want to go in feeling like you're asking them, about public interest type stuff.
Yeah, I asked someone once at a firm in New York, which will remain nameless, about their pro bono, just because literally I was trying to kill time because he had nothing to say to me. And I was just like, oh, do you guys do pro bono work here? Like, what kind of stuff do you work on? And he's like, to be perfectly honest, if that's something you're interested in, I think you should go somewhere else. Oh. And I was just like, okay, well, alrighty then. That was not a great question.
And I think there are people where it's totally okay, and like you see like they're the head of the pro bono committee. And,
right,
and
exactly.
That's a big thing and you're trying to connect with them. But I think generally you probably don't want to go into those areas of work-life balance and all of those type of things and what the billable hours, all of that in this situation. I think you want to go in, you're selling yourself.
Right, and you're selling yourself for a particular role, and if that role is not something that you're actually that eager to do, then that's something you need to probably have some conversations with a career coach about, rather than venting all of that in an interview. The point of the interview is to get the job. Then you can decide if you want the job.
Absolutely. And I think the other final thought about that is, law firms are very hierarchical, and you're coming in at the bottom. And I think you don't want anyone to feel like, you don't know like where you're going to be and where you're going to start and that you're going to be working for them. And, you don't know that much right now. So I don't think you want to like over talk yourself up.
Yeah. And I think a lot of what particularly partners or more senior associates too are looking for is, do you actually understand what this job entails? Mm-hmm. So you need to educate yourself about the realities of working at a law firm so that you don't come off as this incredibly naive person who has literally no idea what they're getting into. It's a very specific type of job. It may or may not be the right fit for you, but you need to understand at least, what is this job? What would I be doing? What are the pressures of the job? Could I handle those? You don't want to come in and just be like, la, 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 it's going to be so fun and educational. It's like, that's not what we're paying you for.
Right. Or, it's going to be all fancy lunches and, all of that kind of stuff.
I think they're looking for somebody who understands this position and can make a solid case that they're a person who is able to succeed in that position.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, unfortunately with that, we are out of time. Sadie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me back.
Our pleasure. For more career help and the opportunity to work one-on-one with us, check out careerdicta.com. We could even do mock interviews. If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on your favorite listening app because we would really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to Lee or Alison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or allison@lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for listening. We'll talk soon, and good luck with those callbacks.